Hi, everyone. Welcome to another workshop from the Writing Support Center. My name is Giselle, and today's workshop is going to focus on transitions in writing. If you've ever had trouble incorporating transitions into your essays, this workshop is for you. The title of today's workshop is Bridging the Gap, Transitioning Coherently. So, before we begin, I do want to give you a couple of suggestions so that you can get the most out of this workshop. My first suggestion is that you complete the worksheet that accompanies this workshop. If this is your first time attending a Writing Support Center workshop, we typically have a worksheet. This worksheet is going to help you process the information in the workshop and internalize what you learn a bit more. It's also going to give you some practice. You can also give this to your instructor as proof if they're requiring you to complete a workshop or if they're offering extra credit for workshop completion. Uh, you're going to see two different files to download. You only need to download one. One is a PDF and one is the Word version of the worksheet. You don't need to download both. As I said, you just need to download the one that you prefer to use. So if you're a PDF person, download the PDF. If you like completing worksheets in Word, download the DocX version. My second suggestion is to take your time as you go through this workshop. Although we can't be face to face, there are some perks to viewing a recorded workshop, and that's that you can pause and rewind as you need. So, if there's something I'm reviewing and you need a little bit more time to process it, you can always pause. Or if you need to hear what I've said, you can always rewind so that you can listen again. Like I said, can't be face to face, but at least there's some perks to these remote workshops. Okay, so for today, we have a few goals that I'd like to accomplish by the end of this workshop. The first one is that you recognize the importance of essay organization and evaluate the organization of one of your own essays. Organization is equally important if you want strong transitions. I know this workshop is about transitions, but like I said, you really need to have strong organization in order to have strong transitions. And we're going to get a little bit more into that. The second goal for this workshop is to help you identify the importance of transitions and how to incorporate those transitions in your writing. The third goal is to review the transitional expressions and when to use them. Okay, so I'm going to go through a list of statements and I want you to think if any of these statements apply to you. So the first one, your instructor has written comments like choppy, jumpy, abrupt, flow, or how is this related on your papers? The second, your readers have trouble following your organization or train of thought. The readers I'm referring to can be a classmate, a peer reviewer, a friend, a family member, an instructor, or a tutor. But if any of them have trouble going through your essay and following organization, you might need to work on transitions. The third one is you tend to write the way you think, and your brain often jumps from one idea to another pretty quickly. You write your papers out of order or you paste together different chunks once you finish writing those parts. You are working on a group paper. The draft you're working on was created by pasting pieces of several people's writing together. So, if any of these statements apply to you, you probably need to work on your transitions. And we're going to go over how you can work on those transitions throughout this workshop. So, why are transitions important? Well, the first point is transitions help you convey information clearly and concisely by establishing logical connections between sentences, paragraphs, and other sections of your paper. You can think of transitions as bridges. They bridge your ideas and form connections that will clarify your ideas to your reader. I also want to note that these connections can be between sentences, paragraphs, and other sections of your paper. I think typically students think of transitions at the beginning of paragraphs. However, transitions can be incorporated throughout your writing, whether that be transitioning between different sections of your paper or between sentences and specific paragraphs. For this workshop specifically, we will be focusing more on transitions between paragraphs. The second point as to why transitions are important is that they function as signs that tell readers how to think about and react to your ideas as they go through your paper. So you might understand the connection between your ideas, but your reader might not. This is why you need to add transitions because it will help get your readers thinking about your ideas in the ways you'd like them to understand them. The third point is kind of related. Transitions highlight relationships between ideas. Like I just said, relationships between your ideas might be clear to you, but unclear to your readers. And ideas can be connected in a plethora of different ways. So using transitions will highlight the relationship you'd like your readers to see between your ideas. The fourth point is transitions can be single words, phrases, or full sentences. Typically, writers associate transitions only with single words like however, additionally, finally. However, this is only one version of transitions. Sometimes you need full sentences to transition between your ideas, which is why you want to think of transitions more of a way to connect ideas than a way to connect paragraphs or sentences. Overall, transitions help readers understand how your ideas fit together, which is why they are super important to your writing. As I mentioned earlier, organization is key to incorporating strong transitions, which is why we're going to talk about the importance of organization. If you don't have strong organization, adding transitions isn't going to be as effective. Therefore, adding strong transitions relies on an essay being logically organized. Organization typically includes two elements, which are order and relationships. Order refers to the way you've presented ideas or your argument and how you've ordered the different parts of your argument. When assessing the order of your argument, you want to ask yourself, does this order make a logical sense? Does each part of my argument lead into one another? If your answer is yes to both of these questions, you probably have ordered your points pretty effectively. Relationship, on the other hand, refers to the connection you've constructed between these different parts and ideas. Not only does your argument need to be ordered well, but you also have to ensure that the relationship between the ideas is clearly established for your reader. If you have a logical order and clear relationships, then you probably have a pretty well organized essay. So, before we move into talking about transitions, I do want you to evaluate the organization of one of your papers. This is because the clarity and effectiveness of transitions is largely dependent on the organization of your paper. So, doing this activity is going to help you see the order and connection between your ideas more clearly. So, for this activity, you will need a paper you are currently working on. If you don't have a current draft, you can also use a previous paper that you need to revise. Um, for this activity, you're going to go through the paper you select and summarize what each paragraph of your essay is about or how it fits into your argument as a whole. You can do this by writing short phrases in the margins, either on a paper copy or by using the comments feature on Microsoft Word or Google Docs. So, whatever you prefer, either way works. You're not actually going to be turning in your essay with a worksheet with these comments on them, but you do need those comments to help you with the prompt on the worksheet. And I do want to clarify that when I say summarize what each paragraph is about, for example, if you get to your introduction, you would just write introduction. On your conclusion, you would write conclusion. For your first body paragraph, you could write a short phrase about what the main idea of that paragraph is. So it's not a full summary where you're rewriting what you wrote in your paragraphs, but just you're just writing phrases so that you understand what each paragraph is about, which is going to help you visualize your entire argument. So after you've gone through your paper and marked the different paragraphs, you're going to go ahead and reflect on your essay on the worksheet. So please answer the following questions in your reflection. Do you feel that your paper was organized? If so, how did you organize your ideas? If not, what could you do more clearly to organize your paper? And the second question, are there any parts of your paper that clearly need stronger transitions? How can you tell? So go ahead and answer both of these reflective questions on your worksheet. And once you're done, you can resume. So go ahead and pause and do that and resume once you're done. So I hope you had enough time to reflect on your paper's organization and whether or not you need stronger transitions. Now we're going to move on to how to write transitions. So good transitions can connect paragraphs and help disconnected writing sound more cohesive. Instead of treating paragraphs as separate ideas, transitions can help readers understand how paragraphs actually work together, reference one another, and build to a larger point. So, like I said, when you think of transitions, you don't want to just think of them as transitional phrases or words that you can use. You want to think of how transitions will help connect your ideas to one another so that your argument is much more cohesive and logical. Strong transitions will highlight connections between paragraphs and establish logical connections. By referencing in one paragraph the relevant material from previous paragraphs, writers can develop important points for their readers. So, what that means is when you are transitioning, part of that transitioning means making sure the ideas between your paragraphs connect. And to do that, you can reference what you talked about in a previous paragraph. In a bit, I'm going to give you a few examples of how that looks so that you can understand that point a little bit more. So here are three more tips for writing transitions. My first tip is to continue one paragraph where another leaves off. If this is challenging, these two paragraphs might not belong together. So what that means is when you write a paragraph, your next paragraph ideally should pick up where the idea is leaving off. And this next paragraph should build on that idea that you mentioned in the paragraph before it. If you can't connect the two, then you might have to add, another paragraph between the two to make the ideas connect better, or you have to revise that second paragraph so that it connects to the previous paragraph before it. My second tip is to incorporate key phrases from the previous paragraph and highlight them in the next paragraph. This can create an obvious progression for your readers. This kind of connects to the previous point in the other slide, which is to reference relevant material from previous paragraphs. Like I said, I'm going to show you an example of what this referencing looks like. Like I said, part of it is just referencing key phrases so that your reader can make that connection. That connection could be, oh, I heard this in the previous paragraph, so I understand now that the writer is continuing that idea in this paragraph. So that's what I mean by referencing or highlighting key phrases. For tip three, instead of writing transitions that could connect any paragraph to any other paragraph, write a transition that could only connect one specific paragraph to another specific paragraph. What this means is that when you write transitions, try to avoid general transitions. General transitions can be thought of as just writing in a transitional word where needed. So instead of saying additionally as the beginning of your next paragraph, you want to think of a specific way to connect the ideas. So instead of thinking of the perfect transitional word to begin your next sentence, think of how can you connect this paragraph with the previous paragraph by writing a more specific transition. As I said, I'm going to show an example that kind of incorporates all three of these tips. So for this example, you're going to see how the three tips I just mentioned are incorporated. So in the original paragraph reads, Amy Tan becomes a famous author after her novel, The Joy Luck Club, skyrocketed up the bestseller list. There are other things to note about Amy Tan, or to know about Tan as well. Amy Tan also participates in the satirical garage band, The Rock Bottom Remainders, with Stephen King and Dave Barry. So this isn't a particularly bad transition. This writer actually did transition. They did try to transition by saying there are other things to know about about 10 as well. So the usage of as well and other things kind of connects the two ideas together. However, it's a much more general transition. As mentioned in tip three, it's not super specific in connecting the two ideas. It kind of sounds disconnected from this idea. The writer is pretty much saying there's other things that you should know in addition to her being a best-selling author. So this is why this transition isn't as effective. It's not super specific to the idea that comes before it. On the other hand, the revised version reads, though her fiction is well known, her work with the satirical garage band, the Rock Bottom Remainders, receives far less publicity. So this transition is much clearer in terms of how it relates to the previous idea. It incorporates the fact that she's a best-selling author by referencing her fiction, and then also referencing the fact that this band she's in gets less publicity, and referring back to the fact that her novel is what she's most well known for. So the transition is much more cohesive in connecting the ideas, and that's what makes a strong transition. Are you connecting the ideas more than you're focusing on the sort of words that you're using? Like I said, this one's more general, and this one's much more specific to what this writer was talking about in the previous paragraph. So keep that in mind when you're transitioning. You want to focus more on connecting ideas, less so on how are you going to connect sentences. Obviously, connecting ideas is part of connecting sentences, but if you make the idea connection the main point of your transition, that transition is going to come out much smoother. So I also want to go over transitional expressions. So these are the words and phrases I'm referring to that students will drop in order to make their um, paragraphs transition from one another. Transitional expressions or devices act as bridges, as I mentioned before, between the different ideas in your paper. They are words or phrases that help carry a thought from one idea to another. They also link sentences and paragraphs together smoothly to help with any abrupt jumps or breaks between ideas. So, transitional expressions are important if you do want that smooth transition. So, if you have the idea of how you want to transition, incorporating these expressions are going to make that transition a bit smoother. You also want to be sure to use transitions strategically to make sure that the word or phrase you're using matches the logic of the relationship you're emphasizing or the connection you're making. So, what this means is you don't want to always use, say, like additionally for each paragraph you're adding. You don't want to use things like in conclusion, as that's not a transition that's super specific to what you're talking about. It's just referencing a general conclusion. You also don't want to use the same transition all the time. Like I said, that's why I mean you want to use them strategically. This is a table that I took from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And these are different relationships on the left side that um, you would consider when picking transitions. So, for example, if you want to show similarity between two ideas, you could use some of these words to link those ideas. If you want to talk about an example to link to your idea, you could use, for example, for instance, namely specifically to illustrate. If you want to show a cause and effect relationship, you would use accordingly, consequently, hence, so, therefore, thus. So, depending on the sort of relationship you want to highlight, you can look on the left side, and then on the right side, it will show the transitional expression that relates to that logical relationship that you want to emphasize. So, feel free to use this table when you are trying to pick a transitional expression to connect ideas. Like I said, you want to use it strategically, so you don't just want to use transitional phrases or expressions without considering how you want the relationship to be emphasized. So, this is a very handy table. I recommend you either screenshot it or go to UNC's website and save it, as this will help you with future essays. So here's an example of using transitional expressions. The original reads, once his system was applied to all acts of manual labor, Taylor assured his followers it would bring about a restructuring not only of industry but of society, creating a utopia of perfect efficiency. The connecting transitional sentence, Taylor's system is the ethic of present day industrial manufacturing. So if you look at these two sentences, the connection isn't quite clear to me. I understand that the writer is talking about Taylor's influence on um, manual labor and how it's restructured industry. I understand that point here, but I don't understand how it transitions into this idea of how it's present day industrial manufacturing. I can infer the connection myself, but the writer could do a better job of making that connection for me so that I better understand what they're trying to communicate. If you look at the revised version, they try to make that connection a little bit clearer by saying Taylor's system is still very much with us. It remains the ethic of industrial manufacturing. So the usage of still, if we go back to our table, um, shows, let me see where it is, with exception and contrast, right? So this writer is trying to show how it was, the system of manual labor was when it was first introduced, and how it is still very much with us. Um, they're showing the connection between how the idea existed in the past and how it exists now. So that relationship becomes much clearer to me just with this usage of the word still. I want to note that the transitional phrase isn't at the beginning of the sentence. I think most of the time when we want to transition, we focus on trying to find the perfect word that will go at the beginning of the sentence. But again, this writer is focusing more on connecting the idea, and by using a word like still, it really bolsters that connection between ideas. You can also see that they rewrote the sentence completely. This one just says Taylor's system is the ethic of present day industrial manufacturing, versus this one really emphasizes that relationship, that it was established back then and it's very much still with us today. They do this by using words like very much with us, and saying it remains. So um, the rewriting of this sentence is largely dependent on using this transitional expression still, but also by rewriting the whole sentence to further illuminate that connection between the ideas. So, like I said, when you're rewriting sentences, it could be as simple as just rephrasing the sentence to show that connection, or adding specific words that will better show the connection between ideas like still or it remains. So, keep that in mind as you revise your own writing. So we're going to do a final activity on your worksheet. Now that you're aware of how to write transitions and transitional expressions, I want you to practice writing transitions into your own writing. So for this activity, you will need to return to the essay you went through during the first activity. In this essay, select a section or sentence where you'd like to add a transition. As you revise, be sure to think about the relationship you'd like to emphasize between the two ideas. Once you revise the sentence or the section in your paper, be sure to write the connection sentence from the previous paragraph, the original sentence, and the revised sentence with the transition on your worksheet. So essentially, what you're writing on your worksheet is the previous paragraph, the last sentence of that previous paragraph. So it would be like this. Then you're going to write the original sentence that you had, and then your revised version. So that's essentially what it's going to look like on your worksheet. I also put 3 different spaces on the worksheet so that you can easily write in these originals and revisions. So go ahead and pause here and do that. And once you're done, you can go ahead and resume. All right, so I hope you found that activity useful, and I hope you have a newly revised sentence that you can turn in with your essay. And that's all I have for this workshop. Um, I hope you found it useful. There are a few sources that I did draw from to create this workshop. So if you do want more information on transitions, I strongly recommend that you visit one or a few of these websites. Um, the website that I always recommend to students is the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. They have a ton of resources that you can use in your writing. And I use their transitions handout to develop a lot of this workshop. There's also the Purdue Online Writing Lab, which is also an excellent resource. They also have two different handouts on how to write transitions called Writing Transitions and Transitional Devices. And then there's two more transition handouts that I did use from the Writing Center at University of Wisconsin-Madison and Writing Commons. But if you really want to learn more, I highly recommend this handout if you are only going to look at one of these. I hope you found this workshop useful. If you do need more help with your essay, please visit the Writing Support Center. We're all virtual now, so you could go to our website, click on the Meet with a Tutor button, and you will be taken directly into a Zoom meeting where you'll be matched with a tutor. Feel free, as I said, I strongly recommend tutoring if you do need more help with transitions. We also have a lot more workshops, including one on flow. So if you want to learn more about how to make your paper flow better, you can watch that one as well. Thank you, and I hope you found this workshop useful.